Before we get into today's tale, I would like to announce that here on Greenwood Stories, I have launched a Patreon page. So if you feel inclined, I'm just asking for a $5 donation to help continue these stories coming. So a link will be provided. Robin Hood turns butcher. It was another fine summer in Sherwood Forest. It was near Midsummer's Eve, so Robin Hood and his merry men were making much fun in the forest. The greenery was so thick that it hid their activities well from the prying passerby who might stumble upon them. The merry men of the forest tried their luck at archery contests, wrestling, stick fighting, and other martial sports. Every so often they would go to the road and take a hostage of a passing abbot, tacksman, or nobleman. They would bring them back to the fair oak tree and have the man feast with them. They would give him plenty of food and ale before taking what money he had and sending him on his way. On this day, Robin made his way to the road to see who might be passing along. Sure enough, along the road came a cart driven by a fine horse and a jolly-looking young man who was merrily singing. Robin called out to him and asked why he was so happy. He clearly looked to be in brighter spirits than anyone he had recently seen. The man explained to Robin Hood that he was a butcher, and that he was on his way to Nottingham town to sell his meats. Upon selling all his meats, he was to marry a girl who he described as being incredibly beautiful. Robin Hood revealed himself to the man and agreed not to rob such a kind and honest man. The butcher said that he had heard of Robin Hood many times and even sung tales about him. Robin then thought for a moment before coming up with a plan. He asked the butcher how much it would cost to buy all of his meat, his cart, and his horse. The butcher was shocked at such a question. He said it would cost Robin Hood 4 marks. Robin handed the man 6 marks, and the butcher was overcome with joy. He never had so much money in his life. He blessed and thanked Robin Hood for skipping off on foot to Nottingham town. Robin then took a hold of the cart and the meat and drove off to Nottingham. Upon arriving, he donned on the butcher's apron and found a stall in the marketplace to set up and begin selling. He shouted from his stall to all the other shoppers coming in and going from the market. He yelled to them that he was to sell any slab of meat, be it lamb, pork, or steak, for but 1 penny. 1 penny was a very low price to ask for such a rare thing as meat in Nottingham. He also yelled and proclaimed that any fine young lass who would kiss him would get the meat for free. Soon a crowd appeared and surrounded Robin Hood and his stall in the market. All were eager to buy meat, and many beautiful young ladies were eager to give him a kiss. It wasn't long before the other butchers all took a serious notice to this young upstart selling his meat for so little, if not free. They couldn't believe it. This man was taking all of their business and making hardly any money at it. They approached him and asked him if he would join them that night in the feast in the guild hall with the town officials, including the sheriff. Robin, of course, accepted, knowing that he would never get another chance at the sheriff himself. That night, they all sat around the table, laughing and cheering and drinking. Robin, whom everyone thought was some local butcher, was loudly cheering to his sales. He boasted that he was making the people in Nottingham happy with his deeds and low prices. The other butchers and the sheriff didn't fail to question this man. They all theorized that this was a young man who had just come into some inheritance and was drunk on his abundance of wealth. The sheriff then approached him and asked him if he had any lands and cattle that he was willing to sell him. Robin claimed that he did have land, more acres than he could count, and more heads of cattle than any man he knew. The sheriff smiled and asked if he would come spend his merriment by selling him some land and cattle. The sheriff assumed that this young man was an ignorant and stupid fellow, so he offered him the low price of 400 marks, a very low price for such land and beasts. Robin, of course, knew this, and not having any such land, he agreed to sell it to the sheriff. The sheriff had Robin sign an agreement that he was to promise him the sale of his land. The very next morning, the sheriff was eager to look upon his new land that he was about to purchase. Robin rode out with him to show him the heads of horned beasts that he was about to sell the sheriff. Soon they approached the boundary of Sherwood Forest. The sheriff did not look happy. He frowned when he was near the forest, as it reminded him of the dreadful Robin Hood, who took the arrow from him in his archery match. Robin then pointed up to a patch of clearing outside the forest, as a herd of deer came running out. Robin then told the sheriff that those were his beasts, and that this was his land, and pointed to Sherwood Forest. Robin Hood then whistled loudly, and out came the merry men, bow and quarterstaff in hand. They acted not in an overtly malicious manner at all, but instead rather friendly in an odd way. Robin invited the sheriff into the forest for a merry feast. Robin's invitation, of course, gave the sheriff no option. The sheriff knew now that this was Robin Hood the whole time. The sheriff easily expected to be killed or tortured. He did not know what Robin Hood meant by this merry feast. Upon arrival to their camp, the merry men set about opening a cask of ale and cooking meats of all sorts. Some played flutes, while others fought in games such as tug-of-war and stick-fighting. More archery contests were done, and all the merriment in the Greenwood was beheld. The sheriff couldn't help but enjoy himself. He was treated as a guest of honor, and even laughed and clapped upon seeing the contests of skill. Before long, the sheriff stood up after a bit of ale. He explained that he needed to be getting going now, and that as the evening was getting too dark. The sheriff expected that Robin and the men were too drunk and out of touch to say otherwise, as he acted like a normal guest. Robin then stood up and explained that they keep a merry inn here in Sherwood Forest, but none of that was free. He demanded £300. The sheriff spat and said that this was a miserable feast and wasn't worth £3. Robin then explained back to the sheriff that he was in no position to be making demands. The sheriff grew pale in the face, then red hot with anger. He opened his purse and threw all 400 marks on the ground before taking off into the forest. After this, word spread, and many songs and tales were told about how Robin Hood had sheared the sheriff and won the day once more.